Hello, Midnight Quilters. Welcome to the Midnight Quilt Show, where we celebrate the best time of the day, when the kids are asleep and the house is quiet, and you know what that means. It's time to quilt. And tonight, we're making a quilt that uses 2 at a time half square triangles, and even better, it's a free pattern. So let's get to it. This gem of a quilt was designed by yours truly, and it uses this beautiful color palette. These aren't normal colors that I would go for, but it's kind of like my ode to summer. I have my beautiful soft corally flamingo color. Well, of course we know I love blue, a little bit of teal, and some white. So now let's start cutting it up so we can turn it into a graphic modern quilt. So the cutting to this quilt might take a little bit because there's a lot of differently shaped blocks. I've designed this quilt so it has a different type of layout. It's not your regular row by row layout. So out of the flamingo, I'm gonna cut some bigger squares and some smaller squares. This will actually be part of the smaller block that's in the center of my quilt. Now I'm cutting up this jewel fabric, again, into all those differently shaped blocks. This is the color that your toes turn when it's really cold outside. Then the background fabric. Now I opted for a white background because it's going to really make these colors pop off of it. So I have some nice long strips. You're going to see what these are going to be used for in a moment. It's going to be amazing. And then the midnight blue squares of all various sizes. Now I'm going to keep cutting, and then we'll put these squares together to make 2 at a time half square triangles. Okay, so I have 2 of my squares right here, and I'm going to make them into half square triangles using the 2 at a time technique. Now in a future episode, we're going to actually make 8 at a time half square triangles, so make sure you stick around for that. But for this particular quilt, I don't need 8 of each one, so we're going to stick with this good old method here. On one of the background squares, I'm going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner. Then I'll place them right sides together, except with solids there are no right sides, so I'll place them together and sew a 1/4 inch on each side of that drawn line. And there's my beautiful block. A quick trim on that line, and then I'll press them open to make my first of a few half square triangles. Now as I'm sitting here ironing, I do think it's kind of ironic I have a mat on top of a mat, but you know how us quilters love our supplies. Speaking of favorite supplies, I'm going to get my little square ruler out and then trim these up. So that gives me 2 half square triangles, but I'm actually gonna need half square triangles of different sizes. So I'm gonna do the same thing with various colors, making larger and larger still half square triangles. And it may not look like it right now, but all this is gonna come together to make a really awesome quilt. So let's make that center block, and I'll show you how cute and adorable it is. So I've laid out all my blocks to make the center part of my quilt. And what I'm going to do is start sewing my half square triangles together in groups of 4, and then sew all those rows together. So I've got that block pieced together, I gave it a good press, and I'm going to repeat that again and again. So here's the center of my block coming together, and since I've made these with half square triangles, I have a lot of seams coming to the center. So what I've done is actually press that open, which I know is not like me. I'm not all into pressing it all fancy and stuff, but when I start to quilt it, it's gonna come in very handy. So very helpful. Turn that correct, and I'm gonna keep assembling this till it's done. And there's the center strip, and all I have to do is sew these into rows, and the whole block can finally come together. The center block is finished, and now I'm going to add a frame around it with borders of that background fabric. So once I sew these together, the center of my quilt will be finished. But don't worry, it's going to get a lot bigger piecing from here on out. I can't wait to show you what that layout looks like. So let me get to piecing and we'll put it all together. So here is the center of my quilt, and I love how the block looks like it's floating in that background. Now I'm gonna add the two side sections and we'll see the width of the quilt come out. Okay, so I'm easily amused, but I'm already loving that this block isn't perfectly center. I have my section over here, which is made out of those half square triangles and bigger pieces, just like we did at the center. And on the other side, same thing, just bigger still. Now I'm gonna sew these together so we can see the center of the quilt, then I'll start adding the top and the bottom. Even though laying out all these sections takes a little bit more thought, the result is so worth it. This layout is completely different and it's gonna make the quilting so much fun. I can't wait to really explore some different textures within the background. But before I can do that, I have to assemble the top and then add the rest of the quilt. So let's get to it. This quilt is finished. Now I just need to baste it and then I can get to the best part, the machine quilting. In an earlier episode, I shared a painter's tape hack and all of you loved it so much, I thought how fun would it be to make a bonus video where I show you common household items that double as quilting tools. So be sure to check that out in the link below. I'll give you a spoiler alert. I love using hooks just about everywhere in my house, but definitely in my quilting room, especially on my sewing machine to hold small items like my scissors. Now I don't have to worry about losing them. Well, now I'm ready to quilt, and I'm gonna use a not so common household item, my ruler, to create straight lines that's going to build up this block and make it bigger than it actually is. Let me show you what it looks like. Starting from one corner of my block, I'm gonna quilt wedges that fill it in. So angling up towards the next corner, then I'm gonna echo the side and return back, making the first wedge. The next wedge is gonna go really close to the first one, so I'm gonna move the ruler over just a bit and repeat, quilting a line out to the edge, echoing the top point, and then coming back to that home base. One more wedge, and then I'll have that whole block filled in. Once I'm finished with the block, I'm gonna travel along the seam to the side corner and quilt some diagonal lines into the background space to really build up that block. I'm gonna continue building up this block by quilting a line to the next point of my block, travel along and add some more wedges. Then I'll do the same on both sides. The reason I love to use the quilting to build up the block is it separates this whole area from the filler I'm gonna put around it. It's kind of like the emphasis or the parentheses saying, hey, you should look at this block, it's pretty amazing. I'm gonna keep working on this block, adding more of the quilting around the background, but in the center, I'm gonna change those straight lines and do something a little more curvy. I'm gonna do some serpentine lines. So starting from one point of my jewel strip, I'm gonna quilt that first serpentine line that curves out towards the center. But I'm not gonna keep going to the other side, I'm going to come right back up and echo that serpentine line, traveling along the edge and quilting those serpentine lines until I reach the opposite point. Now I'm gonna quilt the other side of the block, quilting a serpentine line that comes out and echoing its way back to the center until I reach the opposite point. I love using the serpentine lines because this quilt is very angular and graphic and it's just gonna give it a little bit of a softer look. Now that I have a basic game plan on how I'm gonna attack this quilt, I'm gonna go ahead and start quilting those geometric shapes into the background, adding my curvy little bits here and there, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm all finished. This gem of a quilt is finished, and it just goes to show that using half square triangles in different sizes in an asymmetrical layout can result in a really cool quilt. Of course, it was a lot of fun using the quilting to make those bigger spaces smaller and to build up that smaller center block. Adding some dense back and forth lines and a few swirls here and there gave it a nice contrast. Let's just say I'm pretty pleased with how this gemstone quilt turned out. And don't forget, you can get this pattern free by checking out the description box below, and you'll also find a link to my bonus video, Household Items That You Can Turn Into Quilting Tools. Well, thanks so much for joining me tonight, and I'll see you soon on another episode of the Midnight Quilt Show.